Well, hello, and welcome to a special programme we're having today. This follows on from the Chief Minister in the House of Keys on Tuesday. Alas, I couldn't be there, and therefore we're doing a catch-up now with our political commentator, Chris Robertshaw, and the lady who was leading from the front. Congratulations to Claire Christian, Douglas South. That's what we'll do in part one. I think we're probably doing quite a bit here. Who would like to go first on the performance of our Chief Minister yesterday? I mean, you saw it, and you were there as well, weren't you?
Yeah. Well,
what do you think?
I'll kick off then, if you like. I was encouraged, but afterwards, when I'd thought about it, I thought perhaps I was being a little bit too optimistic. The point that really that I've been very, very focused on has been this whole issue of engaging the AG in terms of how that particular department has behaved right the way through. And why I was encouraged was because for the first time the Chief Minister talked about, we're going to have to examine, I can't quite remember his exact words, we're going to have to examine the matters as to how litigation has been applied in this whole issue and how it interacted with the department. Now, I read that as there's going to be a serious focus on the AG's department. And then subsequent to that, I've begun to think, have I misread or misunderstood what the Chief Minister said? So if the Chief Minister said in Keys, we are really going to look at the AG's department and how they behaved in terms of application of litigation with regard to whether the whole matter should go ahead in the first place, whether there should be appeals and so on and so forth. If that was the Chief Minister's serious intention, then I'm pleased he said it, and I hope that it happens. If, however, it was more of a sop, and that somehow it would be directed more towards the department as to how it behaved in terms of the appeals, then if that's what was actually being said, then I'm uncomfortable.
And I think that's why one of the immediate questions I asked was that the remit of the independent assessment, which I've never heard it being called that before. It was interesting that it was that word, assessment, that he chose to use. I followed up with a question that it would include the Attorney Generals, and that not just them, Cannon Wild, we should also be looking at the wider public service, not just the department. So those that really, everybody who had a hand in this, and also political interference also. So from that perspective, I know that we're waiting to let you know, we're waiting now as members of the House of Keys to actually see the wording of this and how it's going to be presented to Tynwald, and also when it's going to be presented to Tynwald.
I think he was quite sceptical. Would that be fair to say? That it was not quite sounding. I mean,
the details definitely haven't been
using
worked
words.
out.
You can take at face value, and then you have to think. Actually, maybe I need to actually qualify exactly because it's going to be a public inquiry, or is it just going to be?
It's clearly not a public inquiry,
which is hugely different.
Hugely.
Because, as I think it was you, certainly it was mentioned during the proceedings yesterday, that it leaves things that can be left out, or people redacting, or whatever.
So a public inquiry obviously means that it says what it does on the tin. It's in the public, whereas an independent inquiry, these inquiries can be done behind closed doors, and they're a little bit more sensitive, perhaps, to the situation. And then an independent inquirer, whoever that person is, then presents their findings, and the public don't see all of the evidence, whereas a public inquiry would show all we will always hear this from government, and you'll probably remember this, Chris, when we were discussing the COVID inquiry in Tynwald, that there was a very, very big push from the Public Accounts Committee to do a public inquiry into this, but the government pushed that to be an independent inquiry, which is with Kate Brunner now, KC, because of cost, because it can be almost double the amount of an independent inquiry.
Wasn't that strange, though, when he said all costs? To me, and I'm sure everyone's going, well, you just paid out millions of pounds here for something that the poor woman just wanted a job back. And you're almost hiding behind that it's going to be too expensive to make it a public inquiry. Do you buy into that?
I'm very conscious of that fact, because I think that a public inquiry, and I have spoken to the Treasury Minister subsequently to yesterday, and asked him the idea of the cost, although he can't say what this one particularly would cost, but you're talking double the amount of an independent inquiry, millions, he said. A public would be
would that be
millions.
good money spent? I mean,
Millions for what? Sorry.
A public inquiry.
Oh, right. Yes. Well, I think what matters is the terms of reference and the scope, and I think it's only right that members make it absolutely clear what they want to see.
And I think that from a perspective of a member's point of view, the motion that is in my name has that remit of the Attorney General's, has the remit of all of the areas that we want to look at. So really it's just almost changing that from a committee to an independent inquiry.
Have you got your motion there?
I do.
I mean, this is this first thing on the agenda for Tynwald next week, or just
it'll be up to the President how he brings it, but he could do it after questions. He can ask the House if it can be heard after questions, as I understand it. We don't know whether there's going to be a supplementary order paper 3 after mine. So it's all in the detail. What I was going to say was, it isn't just who gets appointed. It is also, from our perspective, I think, from members, it's how that person is chosen. Because if you've got the Council of Ministers choosing the person from the bar, that's not going to be seen as independent or clear-cut, or there's conflict of interest. If
so
you
someone
have,
completely unrelated to any
it's
government at
very
all.
difficult to find who to do. And speaking to the Speaker of the House, what are our options? And those options range from Lieutenant Governor, Public Accounts Commission, Members of Parliament, a mixture of Members of Parliament, Public Accounts Committee. So we really have to see, from my perspective, it's important that the public see and gain that trust from who appoints that, so that they can really see that it's independent as possible.
Do you think it's incredible that we have to keep mentioning this thing about trust, because it appeared to so many people that the trust has now been lost?
Yes.
That you cannot take anything at face value here, because if there's any wriggling that can be done, it appears it will be done, which is incredibly, what's the word? Makes us all feel uncomfortable, doesn't it? And I know you don't like the way the direction of travel is in the House, with this sort of feeling of people trying to get away with things, or get off the hook.
And you've experienced that as well with your FOIs, and it's certainly, it doesn't feel very open and transparent. It feels more closed than ever. I mean, I was lucky enough to have 1 year, and Chris has had a lot more experience than I have in other administrations, and he might be able to compare that, but it does feel that. And then I was just taking an example that one of the items that the Chief Minister mentions in his speech, which I've got here, he mentions that they've put in oversight through a creation of an operational performance board, and its work is now underway. And you know that we had, I think, 15 minutes prior to the sitting to actually see the wording of this, to pose questions. But this one, unfortunately, we didn't get questions on, and there are lots of questions on this. Who are the operational performance board? When was it established? What work is underway? You know, we're constantly told as politicians we're not operational, but yet politicians clearly are going to be involved in this operational board. And I understand it from the press statement, but from government yesterday, it's being chaired by the Chief Minister. Oh. Which is news to all of us.
Sorry, and your feelings on that? The Chief Minister
well,
doing it?
So what exactly are they looking at? Is he conflicted in these areas that they are looking at?
Yeah.
So how is this? It's political, isn't it? So
well, I mean, it's 87% of all the politicians in the House are on some board or in some departments, which makes people like you pretty. I mean, you got your own things, but independency is not exactly easy to find, is it? Anyway,
that's a whole other topic that we can talk about. You know, Chris led the charge in that. You know, not being in a department and being in scrutiny only, and you know, it's getting to the point now where I do feel very, very similar to Chris, and in the sense that really, quite frankly, if we don't get what we want, in the sense that we get independent, it's transparent, it's open, and it's as wide a remit as it should be. You know, access all areas, basically. That's what we need. If it's not that, then I will ask myself questions. Do I want to be in a department where I am associated with a government that doesn't want that? And that is the moral side from my perspective.
I think coming back to the issue of what we thought of the speech in Keys yesterday.
Thank you for bringing that back.
Yes,
I also began to feel uneasy that you're beginning to see the start of a direction of travel for government in how it wants to handle this whole situation. When there was, in the speech, there was reference to the circumstances being extraordinary. It was in COVID. It was extraordinary, exceptional circumstances. I read into that there's going to be a move towards, well, this was an extraordinary one-off, and let's go back to our normal, sensible situation. When in fact, you know, from all our many conversations, I've argued quite the contrary. I've always said that there are inherent and serious underlying problems in government that were manifest and became very, very clear when subject to a really serious crisis. So I take the opposite view. And then the other part of the direction of travel was, oh, but look at all the good things that we're doing. We're doing this and we're doing that and we're doing the other. And I you know, as Claire said, I was involved for a long time. I've seen this so often before about, oh, well, this was an exceptional circumstances and let's treat it as that. And here's what we're going to do now, and the magic and wonderful world ahead. And people are supposed to say, oh, well, you know, okay, that's fine. I don't go with that at all. And I think if that's going to be the direction of travel that government take, then I'm going to get increasingly critical, far more than I have thus far.
Can you get more critical? I think we've been doing a fair amount on it.
I've been pretty moderate up to now.
I definitely agree with Chris on that. This isn't a one-off. This is systemic. These are systemic issues that have been around for a very long time. And this is something that actually, had Rosalind Ranson not had the backing of the BMA, this would all still be under the cover. No changes would be happening. Nothing, you know, this systemic approach would still be there. And we've got a lot, you've said it before, a lot to thank her for.
It was almost like the government has a playbook of how to get rid of people or silence people. And, you know, if you don't do what you want us, we will do together, you will be treated in a certain way, and no doubt they go off into the sunset with some money, but they can't talk about it mostly. But yeah, I mean, it's just
the suggestion that somehow the root cause of this was a conflict between two individuals. I mean, how and that everything else that happened occurred, as it were, everybody else was accidentally drawn into it. I just absolutely do not accept that at all. And anybody who knows the truth knows full well that that's not the case.
Okay, well, let's get back to what he did in the section. You know, you were there, you were both there. I was listening to it on a radio in a hotel in London, so it's quite different on the radio to kind of get the feel of it. But was he carrying the house with him? I mean, it didn't...
Yes, reasonably, but quietly. Okay. I mean, one of the things that needs expansion and examination by members is the phrase that the Chief Minister used about people being too powerful. I mean, I don't think the Chief Minister can put I think that is the case, but I don't think he can put it on the table without full explanation as to what he understands the matter of being too powerful is. I certainly have very strong views as to what being too powerful, influential, overbearing is in all of this. I don't get the match between examining what's happened and what's intended. Some of it I do. Some of these high-level things like adopting a chief executive officer, chief executive of government as a whole, and the reduction of CEOs to CEOs, I get all that. Mm-hmm. But I've yet to understand how government is going to get the trust back. And we talked about this a few minutes ago, this concept of trust. I think it has been lost. I really do. I think it's been completely lost. And I think there needs to be a much greater awareness about, one of the members, I can't remember who it was, said, it's right to express a degree of humility here. Wasn't that mentioned by a member?
I think it was it Wannenberg.
Or was it afterwards? I think it was, yeah, John Wannenberg. I don't see that. I see it now as, well, this has happened and I'm repeating myself, and we need to wrap this up and here's the future. Yeah. No, we stay with what's gone wrong because there's an awful lot to see and an awful lot to examine.
And so to your question about what the feeling was in the House, certainly, and there always will be the ministers against the backbenchers, and the ministers try to make the backbenchers look, irrelevant, I guess. But this is a really very, very serious matter, and I know from those of us who did ask questions, this repetitive, if you want a 101 on what not to say as a minister, well, I'll repeat what I said, or, I said it in my speech. That is no humility, no kindness. Where's that culture change coming from at the top? If ministers are speaking to other people like that in a very open and public forum, actually your questions, you're missing the point. You've got to focus on actually this.
I got that by listening to it. And it sounded wrong, the wrong tone, basically.
Yeah.
Let's be very clear. And he was asked, I think John Wannenberg asked him to clarify, maybe it was you, to say, have you actually spoken to Dr Ranson?
It was John.
To do
have
the apology.
You actually done
an
apology?
Again, when he did an interview with me, and he said things like, I gave my advice about the second appeal. This way you've got to break these words down, because it made him sound, and a lot of the reporting that's gone on says he has apologised to Dr Ranson. But I from this morning anyway, from somebody who got in touch, they haven't, as of this morning anyway, the Chief Minister has not contacted her directly. Isn't that what we were asking for? And he alluded to, but hasn't actually done it. What do you think?
He's done obviously a public apology, in Parliament, but not a more personal one.
Do you think he should do it?
What? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that.
Personally, face to face. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Well, he had her in the room way back at the whole beginning for an hour, and then said, "I believe you." There's a
did he meet her?
He met her, and as far as the documents I've seen, ages ago.
Do you know when?
When this was all.
Was it after the election?
Yeah, I think so. I really don't want to put down dates, but it was he was Chief Minister, as I understand it. So he,
because this was a meeting between
I believe you,
him and her, presumably no one else.
Maybe the husband. I don't know, but he believed her. That's what came out.
Well, none of us know that.
No,
we don't know that. He's never told us that he had a meeting.
Well, I'm going on documents. I've got
I believe.
So if he's had that level of interaction, then
he has met her. I'm pretty sure he has. That's my point. As far as I understand, now maybe wrong, but I understand.
And as chair of this operational board, I would expect him to as well. And also as the Chief Minister.
I believe that the situation was so obviously serious and shocking, the outcome of this, that there really would be a material and significant mindset and cultural change at the top. And, the Chief Minister's talked about cultural. I didn't hear that on Tuesday. I really didn't. I saw an organisation beginning to close ranks, beginning to get
Let's move on.
protective.
Let's move on. We've
Nothing
learned
to-
our lessons,
Yeah,
and this
and
is in the
you know,
past.
I
and-
don't think that's going to work this time, and
You-
I caution the Council of Ministers and the Chief Minister not to do this. I fear it. I've hoped up to now, I've hoped consistently that this was so bad that it would really change things. I don't think that's, from what I heard on Tuesday, initially feeling optimistic, but then on reflection, beginning to see this emergence of a mindset that, come on, people, we can get past this. We just identify certain elements of it and make it and put those in isolation, and then have everything move on. And in a minor way, I've seen that happen many, many times before. So I can recognise when I see it that it's happening, and I believe it's now starting.
You're right, and I think you've mentioned this before. Certainly, after the judgment had been made, and the way that government, the AGs included, at all costs have protected themselves against this, at all costs, and that's been the detriment to obviously £3.2 million and more. And you need to put that aside, because we're not an operational organisation. We're not in the sense that we're a corporate, where yes, in situations like this, you would defend at all costs in private organisations, but we're not. We're the government. We should have a moral obligation to do what's right, and actually say what's right, and actually put our hands up and say, this is wrong and this has happened, and we are going to do everything we can to make that trust come back, to build that trust again. Yeah. And these are the steps, and we're not going to ignore what has happened. We're not going to do that, and we are going to take that seriously and welcome.
And that's what you were expecting yesterday. You expected more meat on the bones, exactly what they're going to do. Now, we have to remember, a year ago when this sort of...
He's had a long time to make an apology.
He said he was going to sort things out a year ago, didn't he? And what happened was a few people went off into the sunset with their pensions, I think. But, there was certainly... I don't think there's been any sackings. There's been just resignations and things like that.
Settlements.
Settlement, you name it. This was a year ago. Mm-hmm. He's had a year to get things going. And he was talking about it yesterday as if it's now he'll get on with it. Was that not odd as well? I mean, the timing seems very slow.
Well, the Chief Minister mentioned three things that needed change: structural, cultural, and the organisational changes. And the cultural issue of change is not about everything below the Council of Ministers and the senior officers. Mm-hmm. It's about them. And they've got to show that there's a fundamental cultural change taking place. Otherwise, nothing's going to happen. If they don't do that as leaders, it isn't going to happen. And as of now, I don't believe it is. Mm-hmm.
You're right. Did the advice, and it didn't go like this, but did the advice go, on a point of principle, I think you should do the appeal. But just remember, we've changed the culture. So actually we should we be thinking of what we're doing here? We've changed the culture at the top and down. Should we be doing this appeal? Didn't hear that at all. We heard by point of principle, but nothing about culture in that email, or nothing about culture in terms from the Chief Minister.
The point of principle was completely misplaced, because that point of principle, this whole issue of legal professional privilege, was not relevant. So this standing, we don't want to go there again.
I'm only referencing it as that was what he said in his email, but he didn't mention culture. He didn't go, but actually, don't do it because of cultural change.
Well, the same people are running things still, right? That's where we get into. There's no been clearing out. No one's going anywhere by the looks of it, and yet we have three civil servants, particularly, whose names keep coming up. Going back a bit further, back to when she was trying to give her advice to Comin, and then it was watered down. You know that bit. So we'll maybe come on to that a bit later. But the point is, how does he get going now? What do you do if you were running the country?
So clearly, absolutely, we and you hear this from politicians all the time, but we do need the facts, and we do need open and transparency. We do need to investigate this, and we do need to absolutely take steps and making sure that we bring the public along with us. How we do that is by, at every step of the way now, it has to be the most independent way of doing things. yes, okay, a lot of people criticised a motion for a committee, but that was just starting the ball rolling. That was just to kind of get this. So, look, you take us seriously as backbenchers. You know, you've got to do something. It asked for an apology. We got the apology, but in some format. They're looking to bring in their own independent inquiry now, so we know that. But this motion, this committee, for the public to know, is basically our safety net. It's our safety net, because they could bring in this independent inquiry, and it might just be, we'll just look at the DHSC and that's it. Just how that they managed it. But it's not just that. At least we've got this as a safety net. And this actually, as you know this, Chris, committees can call independent inquiries very quickly. So a committee can be, if we don't go for their one because it's not wide enough, we go for the committee. Within weeks, you can call, bring back to Tynwald, actually, we should be doing an inquiry, and we expect Tynwald to do it like this. So we can use the motion as a vehicle if we need to, and that's what makes good sense. So how we make those steps, how we build that trust, it's got to be, as you've said, leading from the top, better, the way that we talk to people, giving people respect and saying, talk to us, tell us what you want, tell us how you...
And what would you have done, Chris, if you were running the operation? What would you now be doing?
Well, he wouldn't have let it get this far.
Yeah, well, no. That's a fact, and it should never have started.
Well, it is what it is.
That's the point. If you were in it here now...
Well, at the time, it could have been stopped.
What were we all doing here? Remember that famous line?
Before, before it got to the tribunal,
I
was saying, you can avoid this, you can deal with it in-house, you can retain a fine medical director, desperately needed because of all the changes that are going on. And the machine of government just plodded on remorselessly, crushing people. And let's never forget, and this business about it was a clash between Catherine Magson and Rosalind Ranson. Hang on a second here. A whole cadre of senior people left government. Why? Because they'd lost their integrity. Were they the only ones? So given the fact that if it had been me, it wouldn't have started in the first place, given that became unavoidable, and bearing in mind that one is only in politics for a certain amount of time and that you carry a huge burden of responsibility, I would have opened up a hell of a lot more. I certainly would not have tried to protect the establishment. And I think Claire said it, I would have gone for the truth. And the truth is pretty awful. But at some stage or other, there's got to be a recognition of it and action to deal with it. This idea that there's now this, excellent way forward and everything's being changed to calm everybody down, I just don't accept it. How can you change things for the better if you don't first admit honestly and openly that certain things were wrong? What was that system in South Africa they used, where the two sides were completely at odds? There was a frankness and an openness that we had to recognise really difficult things. That's where we're at now. Our government is a mess. And
okay, the last bit in this bit though.
Okay.
Can Alf Cannon pull it off? Can he get this supertanker going in a different direction?
I desperately want him to.
But do you think he can?
I hope so, but I'm beginning to. We'll come on to the next stage. I was really troubled this morning, listening to.
Let's do the next bit.
Yeah, the next bit.
I guess we'll have more of an indication over the next few days whether he can or whether he can't. He does have the chance to, but he has. If he can't bring the backbenchers along with him, then he's never going to have a chance with the public either, because ultimately we're feeling it from the public. We've got the most, I guess, up-to-date information from our constituents, and they're telling us that they're just hearing the same same
yeah.
things
So
again.
it was a misstep yesterday. You think the feeling in the House, the people you discussed it with, other MHKs, that he didn't get the tone right, he didn't answer questions in the way that you'd like to hear them?
And certainly, I think there could have been, as John Wannenberger said, certainly more humility. And you know, as I said, you probably can hear me saying when he says for the third time, I don't know if you heard. Did you hear it? Well, he says, you know, I'll say it again. And I said, no, please do say it again. You know, if you have to, do, because actually we're just seeing, and there's no grace in that. We're just seeing this. We're just hearing it. You know what? If we have to ask questions several times, because do you know what, they're not really concise with these words. They're not. We have to. That's how close to the grain we are. What do you mean? And we're not getting the right answers back. We're not getting proper, concise answers at all. Yeah. And so if we ask it again, then you wonder why.
And for those who couldn't see it, was he working off lots of different notes in case, depending on what the question was going to be, or was he talking, you know, at you directly, properly, there's, you know, off the top of his head? And
I mean, I think he was pretty much doing it off the top of his head. But
he's done a lot of research.
Yeah, I couldn't. I mean, I sit behind him, so I can't see.
Okay, let's leave it there. We've got lots more to talk about. Hope this is of interest. Well, I know it is. We're getting, and then, you know, again, playing out all over the place, which is something else. Anyway, more from me and my guests in the next section.